You have an impulsive president who, we've been exposed to him now at a major level for 10 years, does not have the attention span or the discipline to ask or inquire on the follow-up questions.
I'm Joanna Coles, Chief Content Officer of The Daily Beast, and this is The Daily Beast podcast. Please feel free to subscribe or leave comments after today's interview with none other than Rahm Emanuel. You may remember him as the Chief of Staff to Barack Obama. He went on to be Mayor of Chicago, and he's just come back from being Ambassador of Japan. He's got opinions on everything, not least his own decision-making around whether or not he decides to run for president for the Democratic Party. So let's not waste any time. He's been in the Situation Room when big international situations have been going on. We've had one this weekend. Let's find out what he thinks. What was your reaction to the news that Donald Trump had bombed Iran's, in theory, nuclear facilities?
Well, I'd be less than honest if I didn't say I have a set of mixed emotions. It's not singular in the sense good or bad or thumbs up, thumbs down. Because one, remember, Iran, contrary to what they said, was on the course of trying to get a nuclear weapon. Two, they have both directly, indirectly killed or tried to kill Americans. They have been a sponsor, not just a terrorist organization, done a lot of killings in Europe. As recently as off the Yemen coast, they had a ship that was directing Houthi fire on American servicemen and women, and I am a father of two in the United States Navy.
I was going to ask you about that.
I don't see a sovereign nation, but not a benign one, to wrap that up. So there's that element. There's also the element that, Iran was... if you look at and I was a supporter of the 2015 agreement, and that's a 52-48, 51-49. It's not like 100% yes, and being opposed was a zero. There were two weaknesses, or three, but definitely two. One was it left in place Syria, Hezbollah, Hamas, etc., and Israel over the last 600 plus days has dealt with the octopus that was encroaching. Second, which is, I've been talking about this, it left in place the missile production capacity, both the delivery piece. And if you look at, beyond everybody focusing on the 3 nuclear sites, Israel has systematically been attacking the missile production infrastructure, going back to the first bombing, the second bombing, and now this. When I say second bombing, I mean there's been 3 different points of bombing. So they have dealt with what you would have said was the 2015 weaknesses, vulnerabilities of that agreement that Israel outlined. So in one of me is this was you could see the value to this. On the flip side, nobody's answered some question that I think is a very important question. The United States intelligence domain, President dismissed them, had one view about where Iran was on the breakout and the capacity and the interest and the intent. The international community kind of agreed with the American intelligence. They were kind of they were heads and tails of the same judgment. The Israeli intelligence was all the way on the other side. This was 2-week runway, and they were on a breakout. Now, we also know, and I think this is accurate, or I should say we know, but I agree with this premise, that one of Prime Minister Netanyahu's motivations was his fear that President Trump, and the Iranians were going to cut a deal that Israel thought was a bad deal, and their opportunity window would be shut. And so he took it. And this is not a today moment, but America just took military action that we don't know where this is going to end, in opposition to its own intelligence judgment and in support of the Israeli intelligence option. Now, maybe you asked me to put you in the Situation Room. The thing is, having gone through a number of things, hitting terrorists, Afghanistan buildup, why is it that Israel has this judgment, and why is it we have this judgment? And where does that discrepancy go? Are we getting the full story from Israel? Are we getting the full story from ours? Why are you saying X? Why is the international community saying similar X? And why are the Israelis at Y? Because if you're asking the president to make a decision, you're basing it on one set of intelligence judgments, not on another. And we pay these people. So that would be what I would press. And the third is, on all these things, what is the kind of scale from best outcome to worse? Put them out. And, every president's different. President Obama, President Clinton would want memos and the debates about those. Obviously, this president's more visual. So what is option best case scenario? Probably capitulation. Worst case scenario, full out decades of terrorism across the globe. Strait of Hormuz is going to get closed down. Just all the options.
So you've laid out a perfectly rational case for how you would approach it. Do you think that's what Donald Trump's approach was?
Is that a faux question or a realist? I think you know the answer. I don't. Ready? U.S. history for 200. I don't think the critical thinking of walking through, and the reason I say the critical was done in this White House and done with it. Look, you have an impulsive president who, by any, we've been exposed to him now at a major level for 10 years, does not have the attention span or the discipline to ask or inquire on the follow-up questions. Now, maybe there's a different Donald Trump behind the curtain than we know about outside the curtain. This is a guy that's driven by the news story, driven by dominating the public, and he doesn't have, as somebody who's self-aware, I have my own attention deficit disorders as an adult. I look like steady compared to that. So I don't think they went through what I have seen President Clinton and President Obama up close take, not just on, also there's domestic policy decisions that you make on healthcare with President Obama and the financial system versus when President Clinton was deciding after vetoing 2 welfare bills, the third one, the debate. All of these take 3 levels: politics, policy, publicity. And I say that, and you have to have an integrated whole. And I don't think this president or his staff, I would not. I'm exposing myself. So if you had Ken Quarters, there's not one person that intelligence or in defense, the appointed cabinet members, that I would say would be the top 10 people I would call.
Tulsi Gabbard, the head of national intelligence, actually said to Donald Trump and put out there that there was no evidence that Iran actually had nuclear capabilities. He then immediately came out, undermined her, and said, yes, they do. And then she rolled back and said, well, they will have in a few months.
Well, that was a plea to keep her job. That wasn't her. I mean, so that gets back to that one point I said. I would want to. As a president, and I'm not that, as a chief of staff, I was that, as a congressman that was in the leadership, why is it we concluded this? Why are the Israelis concluding that? Really opposed. Mm-hmm. And tell me, what are the assumptions behind us? And I want the answers to why the Israelis concluded this. And you're asking me for my bombing, putting my troops at risk. Tell me, I want to see your intelligence. I don't want to see what you've given me. I want to see what what you haven't given me. There's a part of me that tosses and turns at night about this question. That doesn't look, I mean, there's, I have a rule in politics. People that are being very friendly are not your friends.
Worth bearing in mind. I'll remember that next time we interview a politician. Oh, wait, we are interviewing a politician.
Are not your friends. So tell me, and this is something I got, I swim in the morning, so I'm giving you my bad habits. I swim a mile, and I take a question all the time rather than count my laps. And I go, this thing has occupied since we did this. What is it that the Israelis know that we don't know, and what is it we know that they don't know? And before you decide yes, because once you decide yes, there's no way back. I want to know the answer, and the president needs to know this answer. And I would demand, if I was sitting not to the president's immediate left, and then you were sitting at the top of the table. Tell me the difference and why.
But doesn't it appear right now that nobody knows anything, that we don't know whether or not they moved their nuclear capabilities? We don't know how effective the bombing has been. I wanted to ask you a question. I'm sure one of the reasons you toss and turn at night is you have two children or adult children.
I toss and turn ever since working for President Clinton. I haven't had a good night's sleep in 30 plus years.
Okay, well, that's not good. That's not a good. Not a good preparation for president, or perhaps it is.
Something about being in a manual.
Well, I want to come to that in a minute. Let me ask you this: you've got two kids in the military.
One active, one reserve.
How do you feel about them taking instruction and policy that impacts their actions from Pete Hegseth and the Defense Secretary and this president?
Well, look, they took an oath, and they're going to live by that oath. If I talk about him as a father, I'll start tearing up. I'm immensely proud. They grew up in a home where you have to do some point in the national service. You have to dedicate a year giving something back. I don't know what you're going to do in your life, but it will be very good for you. It will be good for the country, but you have to do that. Pause. Amy's family, her father and her grandfather, our kids, grandfather and great-grandfather, go back generations in the Navy. That's how they got to that. I got to be honest, what I was thinking, Teacher America, something. But they made this choice, and I'm proud of the choices and the judgment and the character that it reveals. Now, I'm going to not say it because they took an oath, so they got to abide by that oath. I'm going to say something more, because I don't want to speak. I don't want to speak for them. I want to speak because I don't think that's fair or right, because they can do that for themselves as mature adults. When Zach Araya joined, I don't know, about a year in, he's also joined and he's deployed during COVID and what. I did ask myself, and I do think this is why there should be, and I've written about some form of universal national service. I've been in the situation room with two different presidents over 8-year span with different challenges, national security. I don't think I ever, and I said, remember what I said, policy, politics, and press, or publicity, or whatever. I don't think I ever made a judgment, or advice, rather, gave counsel, where politics and press outweighed the policy. You try to give an integrated approach. But I would be less than honest if I didn't tell you, as a parent, you think about it different. If I didn't tell you that, I'd be lying to you.
I mean, the Secretary of Defense is a former Fox News host. The president openly doesn't read his intelligence briefings. He makes a point of not reading his intelligence briefings, saying he goes on instinct and his instincts are better and he knows everything. If I had children in the military and that was the leadership, I would be panicked.
Yeah, I understand. They're adults, and I know not to speak for them. So I want to be careful.
Fair enough.
because while there's a press and et cetera, my role as a father is the most important thing in my life. And so let me just say, let me go off of what you said. He says instincts. I'm into the judgment of a president. And being able to ask the right questions, have the right people around, and not be scared of people that challenge your judgment. And so while he may say instincts, and I saw the vice president's comments the other day saying every predecessor was an idiot. Well, when President Clinton was making a big decision, he called President, especially on major foreign policies, he called President Bush.
Well, and he famously read books, right? He famously read everything he could get his hands on.
You have an obligation to brief your predecessor. It's a good tradition. We're Americans first, then you can figure out your partisanship. And you not only want them fully briefed, you want their full judgment, because there's only X amount that have sat right in that chair. I can say that as a mayor who sat there, which is why I don't say anything to make my successors' lives more difficult. That has a pressure. And you want their insights because not only a few people have sat with that responsibility. And so instincts is one thing, judgment is another, and my preference, because then let me give you one piece of history since I am a butt for that. We are benefited as a country, as a world, that the Bay of Pigs mess up happened before the Cuban Missile Crisis. Because Kennedy learns from what he inherited from Eisenhower, told the trigger, learned from a big mistake, takes responsibility, and those lessons get applied X months later, more than a year, to the Cuban Missile Crisis. He's a wiser, smarter, and his judgment, his ability to acknowledge his failure, learn from it. So I say that there's other examples in history from other presidents. It's not instinct. We as a country, Bay of Pigs is a mess on American reputation. Kennedy owns it. But it's to our benefit. We don't see it at the time when the Cuban Missile Crisis occurs. And that is so I'm great for instincts. Give me character and give me judgment. That's the scorecard. And we all fail. Do you have the judgment to learn from your failure, pick yourself up, and put your right foot in front of your left foot and start again? That's what you want out of a president because they're all going to fail.
And do you think we have that in the current president? You're running for president. You want to run for president. I'm trying to get you to tell me what you think of the guy in charge now, because he's unusual and he's changed the game in terms of how people run.
Here's what I do think. I will tell you what I used to tell President Clinton and President Obama. If we all knew in the first year of the second term, if we all knew in the first year of the first term what we knew by the first year of the second term, your presidency would be different. I do think while Donald Trump's outline is the same as it was from 2016 to 2020, he benefited from that period of time off and in the second term. That was true for President Clinton. That was true for President Obama. It's true for anybody. Do I think he has the judgment? No. Do I think he has the discipline? No. Do I think he has surrounded himself by quality people who will challenge his assumptions? No, I do not. And I think that's a big loss. It's a loss for America.
So you're seriously considering a 2028 run. Why?
Well, it gets to the core. I think the American dream is unaffordable and inaccessible, and I think that is unacceptable. And I grew up at a time where if you work hard, you can attain the American dream. Today, working hard doesn't get you there. It's been restricted to probably your kids, my kids. That's not right. It can't be the American dream if only 10% of the children get it. The system is rigged against people. And I also say this now slightly in the philosophical, but it's not an accident. At the very moment the American dream becomes unaffordable is exactly when American politics becomes unstable.
Haven't you been part of the process of it not being affordable? I mean, you've spent 16 years effectively in office, 16 years with two presidents.
One of the things I said earlier is knowing what you've done right, what you've done wrong, and being able to learn from it. Now, I happen to think, let's go over my record if that's where you want to go, which is I was the person both on creating children's health care for 10 million children that had no health care, having created negotiated help pass Obamacare. One of the core elements of the American dream is being able to afford health care and not having it go at risk. When I first get to Congress, one of the first bills I do was automatic enrollment for 401k. Retirement security is a big challenge. And I was mayor, and I happen to think education costs is one of the biggest drivers of middle-class insecurity. First city to make community college free. You get a B average, it's free. You maintain that B average. Every university and college in Chicago gives you another 40% off, 50% off the remaining years. So did I solve it all? And you are right on pieces of that. But whether it's retirement security, educational security for your children, healthcare affordability. I've been at the front end of each and every one of those, whether I was mayor, chief of staff, or congressman. I think the American dream is unaffordable, and I think restoring the American people's confidence and accessibility to that will strengthen not only our economy, our democracy, and our projection across the globe. And to me, that's the core. And I don't think, now I want to get to education, somebody fought hard for that. I don't think we've been focused on what I think is the most essential piece for the future, which is education. There are three great movements in Americans' economic expansion. All of them are underpinned by educational access. The land-grant colleges under the Lincoln, high school becoming universal, the GI Bill under Franklin Delano Roosevelt a year before the war ends. My view, and this is what I did as mayor, is we have to focus on the next generation. And we are at a 30-year low on reading, a 30-year low on math. We've been focused on bathroom access and not classroom excellence, and that is fundamentally misguided. And if you want to have a future, you have an era where you earn what you learn. And we are not focused on that future. And we got to stop borrowing from it and start investing in it.
Okay, so why did the Democrats lose the last election?
Look, 70% of the country, there's three layers I do in this. 70% of the country thought the country was headed in the wrong direction. Well, that's kind of a baked-in anti-incumbent. But a layer below it, this is my judgment, other people have a
usually the incumbent has an advantage, right?
Right, but the vice president was an incumbent and not. But let me just finish. Second piece is Kamala Harris gets a nomination. The Democrats, Biden-Harris ticket is 8 points below. She gets the nomination, run it all the way through to the debate, and she goes +3. Somewhere after the debate to the close, they go off into this democracy argument. And if you cared core to democracy, we had you on yes. And then third, not just 2024, not just 2020, 2016. There are three seminal moments in the last 20 years that I think are setting the parameters of American politics. The Iraq War, where we go spend $1 trillion plus, built on a lie, and people lose their lives, are maimed for life. And everybody accountable, everybody responsible for that lie, never held responsible or accountable. 4 years later, same on the financial scandal. People lose their livelihood, their homes, and the bankers are running around saying we want our bonuses, etc. Don't pay a price. COVID, big upending of American life and routines. And the Democrats become the party and the voice of the establishment, and allow the Republicans to be the anti-establishment in a very era and time where people hate the establishment and have every reason to, because the establishment has one rule book and the rules are fit for their success, and everybody else is supposed to live by another set of rules. And so to me, 70% of the country thought it was heading in the wrong direction, kind of built in anti-incumbent. She could have won, didn't win, and there's a series of mistakes in the campaign. And then third, kind of defining this moment in time, not just that election in time. There's a lot of ways we talk about black, white, male, female, college, non-college, urban, rural. Establishment and the rest of America is the big divide. And that has to be acknowledged by those in the establishment. We have cut our ties to the American people, and they resent it because they think we've just self-feeling, and they have a lot of reason to think that's true. A lot of examples.
You have a great career in public service. You've been a congressperson, you've been a chief of staff, you've been a mayor. In traditional times, that would be a good resume to be a president. What's interesting about this current president is that he appears to have upended what people want in leadership, and he has his own social media platform. He brought in Elon Musk, who had his own social media platform. Should the Democrats welcome back Elon Musk? I mean, he was a Democrat before he went over to the Trump side.
Well, again, I know you think you'd probably find it hard to believe. Let me focus on me for a second.
All right, well, let's talk about you. But I'm curious. I do want to know whether or not the Democrats should welcome Elon back.
Okay, I'll start with that. I'll do the second question first.
So what I'm really asking you, though, is how you compete against the new style of leadership that Donald Trump has created. Because in theory, you would be a slam dunk on paper, as would several other Democratic people we know are going to run. But these are not normal times. He's changed the paradigm.
The question is this is an answer in progress. So what I mean by that is, look, you say Donald Trump is scrambled, and I think that's true, obviously. But we don't know whether, and what I do know about American history and presidential history specifically, the next president answers what you think are the deficits of the predecessor. The successor scratches the itch. Kennedy to Eisenhower, Nixon to Johnson. I mean, you just go through it. Carter to Ford.
Trump to Obama.
Trump to Obama, Obama to Bush. It's just that person scratches the itch left by the predecessor. So while Donald Trump has upended a lot of we know about politics in America, we don't know what that itch will be. I have a guess, and it's a work. That's why I say it's a work in progress. I'm not sure it's going to be looking for a cheaper version of Donald Trump. Look, in politics, it's the art of addition and building a big math for addition. That's what Donald Trump did. He brought in working class people in the Republican Party, and then he brought in working class Black and Hispanic voters. He brought in tech community. We have been experts as a Democrats over years of subtraction. I would want to reverse the game of subtraction that we have become really good at. And I think so I don't think it's just Elon Musk, but I would welcome as a party young entrepreneurs who are solving tomorrow's problems and know that the Democratic Party sees them, their entrepreneurship, whether it's a small business or whether it's a technology company, whether it's somebody that puts their heart and soul in a coffee shop and something new. I want you to see the Democratic Party as your home. Yes. And I think welcoming entrepreneurs at every scale is exactly right. Now, one of the big problems is big technology rigs the system so those entrepreneurs don't have really the same chance that the big guys have. I do think that's not Elon Musk, but that's a technology as well. That's an entrepreneur writ large. What other segment of the economy? If you put your heart and soul and your dream into and sweat equity into creating something that's your dream, you and your family, the Democratic Party is on your side. And this, to me, is if you work for a living, you're going to have a government that works for you. And we haven't done that in a while.
I get that. I get that. And I get the appeal of the technology community. What's interesting about Elon Musk is he comes with X. He's the richest man in the world. So he comes with an enormous ability to fund specific candidates on the ground. He said that he wants to start up a third party. Is there a move here where you could invite Elon Musk back?
Look, I dealt with Elon Musk when I was mayor, when we were trying to do one of the unique things and all that stuff. I dealt with him when I was chief of staff, when he was first thinking of SpaceX, etc. He is a successful entrepreneur and not a one-trick pony. He's done rockets, he's done telecom, he's done a car, and now he's trying to do the tunnel piece. So at one level, you can say whatever you want about him personally, not lifestyle, et cetera, et cetera. He's not a one-trick pony. There's some technology people, they make a one hit and they think they're geniuses on everything, and that's just not true. And I respect, I have different fundamental policy differences with him, and but I do respect the person who has upended 3 different industries and brought a level, and I'll say by way example. We had 2 astronauts stuck on the International Space Station. Mm-hmm. Thank God we didn't have to rely on one company to solve it and bring them home. And thank God we made that investment. We had competition. And not only competition, a different model. And we invested in that. I don't think, and this gets to a core issue, so I welcome in any entrepreneur that is trying to change the world and make it a better place. You can argue out, and I've had my disagreements, but I do respect that he's done something in 3 different spaces. 4.
5 if you add Doge.
I wouldn't call that, I think, well, that's where I have a disagreement. Bill Clinton did more savings with the reinvention government with Al Gore, finding more headcount reduction. The headcount of the federal government was at the smallest level since Eisenhower, less headcount, smallest level. And B, more important than that, it passed the House and Senate with massive bipartisan majorities. So it didn't end up in court. It actually won in the court of public opinion. It passed the legislative branch. That's what governing is supposed to do. It is hard, but I don't actually think Doge was anywhere close to this. I actually think it was nothing but a bull in a Chinatown that ended up in the federal courts. And I'm not sure it's going to save any money, and I'm not sure it's going to save a headcount, but we did lose a lot of intellectual talent. Bill Clinton showed a different model, which I happen to think is the right way, something I followed when I was mayor.
So you would or you wouldn't have Elon Musk back? Would he be a useful supporter for you once you lay down your...
I think it's way too premature. My attitude is addition. You're trying to personalize it to one individual. I think he has something. I don't agree with him on policy, but I do admire. He upended the telecom.
Okay, so I guess what I'm trying to say is I appreciate your sort of theoretical approach and your 3 stages.
Theoretical?
Well, to me, what you're missing, but
Nobody's
to
ever
me,
accused me of being theoretical. And not only accused, I take it as a compliment.
All right,
I got to see myself as pragmatic.
Here's the thing that I'm interested that you don't mention, which I think is increasingly important, is people. It's the people of it all, right? And people respond to people. Voters respond to people. They loved Bill Clinton. They loved President Obama. They liked Joe Biden. A lot of them liked Donald Trump. And what I'm sort of getting at is that feels like it's changed. Memes have changed. Social media has changed how people think about the people that are going to lead us from now on. You can see it going on in New York City right now, where there's a battle for primary for the Democratic Party, which I'm sure you're very conscious of. So I'm just curious as to how you think you can sort of game that new system.
Look, I don't want to game it. Makes it look like you're faking it. And so let me say one thing about myself that I think it's true. If you ask me, and I think about it, I don't think anybody's ever said I've not been honest. I don't think anybody's ever said that I'm not who I am. I'm not somebody else or trying to fake who I am. And third, I have a certain amount of, the nickname I got, going back to President Clinton, was Rambo. I have taken on the gun lobby and created and helped pass the assault weapon ban. I've taken on the insurance companies and helped create the children's health insurance program. I was the first mayor and any government official to sue the pharmaceutical industry over opiate. I took on the educational bureaucracy and created free community college. And I took on all the healthcare industry and helped create and pass Obamacare, and also the banks that were screwing the homeowners and small businesses. So that suddenly felt like a stump speech.
That suddenly felt like it.
No. Hey, well, Joanna, in all due respect, I love this interview, and I love your red, white, and blue as a British coming over to America and wearing that outfit. I am who I am. I'm comfortable with that. Now that you're asking the question, you hadn't asked it before about Elon Musk. I am who I am, and I believe there's a place for candor, authenticity, and strength. And we'll see if it works, if I decide to do it. And I don't know.
Why would you decide against doing it? I mean, you've basically said you are doing it.
I can't believe the two of us got something lost in translation and we both speak English.
Well, I've lived here for 27 years. I'm sorry to disappoint you.
Look, if I think I have something to offer that others aren't, that will be a big piece. If I think I not only have that, but I have the skill set in a way that I think adds to the politics. I think I've been able, in the short period of time of being back, challenge some of the mistakes I think Democrats made on the cultural front and focus it better on what I think are middle-class values and middle-class economic interests. And if I think I could execute on that, I'll do it. Part of my other question is, you got to ask yourself, not too far from your questions, do you have what it takes? Do you have something that nobody else is doing? And can you make a contribution or win? And is there a path to do it? So there's like a lot of questions. And then you ask also, is this something, I've run before, you haven't? you ask something also personally of your family, a sacrifice. Am I right to do that, given that I have asked a lot of my family in the past? So there's a lot of different layers. If I didn't sit here and say, there's also a personal thing. I mean, you talked about my resume, whatever, but the experiences, that is both a strength and a weakness, but it's also, is it something I would ask of my family again, personally, with my kids, given where they are in their lives, and having your father out there? Is that really something that you want to do at this point? You ask yourself that, all of us have certain arrogance, that we have a skill set that we think we can do that nobody else has. And do I have a set of ideas that I don't think other people are not that we all share this? Am I articulating them in a way that I don't think the others are articulating? And do I have a strength to not just articulate them, not only think of them, but a record of actually producing? And you can see that, like, something I care deeply about, as William Bennett, Ronald Reagan's Secretary of Education, before I was mayor, called Chicago the worst public school system in America. Sean Reardon at Stanford, the leading educational demographer, called Chicago an outlier of excellence of big city educational systems. I care deeply about that and other subjects. I think that's core to the American dream. And I have shown the strength and character to take on fights to make that possible.
Okay, so what do you make of Bernie Sanders and AOC's tour at the moment, the oligarchy tour, as they're calling it?
Well, I mean, my own thing is, I think there's I grew up at the time it started. The Democratic Party had rural seats, they had southern seats, etc. The Southwest was kind of closed off. That has changed over the period of time. But actually, and that was a big party, and I'm for Big Ten. I actually think that regardless of the Progressive Caucus, the New Democratic Caucus, if you thought of it from congressional wings or whatever, there's a greater consensus in our party of what's wrong. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the things that Bernie and AOC offer, which is that the system is rigged. That's exactly what I think the American people want, a shot at the American dream, and they're getting the shaft. So the system is rigged. And there's more of a consensus. I mean, Bernie talks about free college. I created free community college, the first city to do it. They talk about raising the minimum wage. We were one of the first cities to raise the minimum wage in the city of Chicago. So there's a consensus there. Do we have differences? Yeah. But we have also a lot of consensus, and I think that exists also in the party as a whole. I actually think, yeah, I do. I'm not saying it flippantly and stuff like that. There's disagreements. I'm not airbrushing them. It's where you emphasize it. There's more agreement is where the emphasis is if you really step back and listen to it. But I think there's an agreement on the critique that the system is rigged against the American people's own success and their kids' success. There's an agreement that education, healthcare, retirement security, home ownership are core pieces that the system is structured today doesn't make it more accessible and doesn't make it more secure to the kind of underpinning an American dream. And one of the policy pieces to that, that's where you start to get a little bit of a shade. But as I said, Bernie, I know this when we served in the House, was talking about free college. When I was mayor, I created free community college. Okay? So, and I saw the value in that. I also, as mayor, and I want to take an emphasis on this, only city to do this, and I haven't seen anybody replicate it at state of city level. To get your high school diploma, you had to produce a letter of acceptance from a college, a community college, a branch of the armed forces, or a vocational school. So every child, not just my children, not just Joanna, I don't know if you have kids, but that just your kids, every child has a post-high school plan. And I created in the city first kindergarten universal, pre-K universal, because those were essential. They have advocated it. We did it in Chicago, raised the minimum wage. And so there is consensus on policies that address the anxieties in the American people. And I say this, and let me close one thing, but not talk about Bernie or AOC or me. When I have when I used to go to the graduation and then the announcement the kids are getting accepted into the Chicago Star Scholarship, the free community college, the relief in the parents' eyes that they did not have to take a second mortgage, a second job, or only one child gets to go to college. The relief that policy created in the every parent, every day from day one, how do I make sure they're launched? And there are a lot of things I did that I think helped parents. This was something that really, you could see the tears, the psychological relief that a parent left. And that's why, let me go to something proactively where I think we've gotten sidetracked as Democrats. I call my education agenda ART. A for attendance, R for reading, and T for truth. We have a massive crisis post-COVID in attendance. I would have a national standard, 5%. Otherwise, you're not getting national money. That kids can't get social promotion missing 20% of the school year, a quarter, or rather a fifth. Second, Mississippi and other states have shown that what's called the Mississippi Miracle, going back to the basics and more time on it in reading and math in the core subjects, and shown real incredible results with very difficult demographic groups. And third, the truth. Parents need to know how their kids in fit schools are doing on national standards in reading, math, and the area. And to me, ART is a commitment I would have to restore our educational system, because we are at 30-year lows of reading and math. And if I want to run, I have an obligation to lay out a plan for it.
So the central flaw I find in your argument that people think the system is rigged is
central flaw. There's like 20 of them.
Well, all right. Well, the one that I can see that I'm struggling with is that Democrats have been in charge for much of this time. They've been in charge of California. They've been in charge of New York, where arguably kids were kept out of school for far too long. You had all sorts of red states getting kids back into school and getting the state up and running much faster. You had 8 years of Obama. You had 4 years of Trump. You had 4 years of Joe Biden. So it's not like Democrats haven't been in charge here. It's not like they haven't been given a chance. They have.
Let me push back on you on a couple of. One is, first of all, you said flaw. I wrote about this, so obviously I don't know what was doing the research. I've said we got to own the fact that during COVID,
but why right? No, I did read that. But why should anybody trust you if you've been at the helm effectively for the last 20 years? Why would they think, oh, here's a guy who's benefited from the system, but he's saying the system is rigged?
Okay. Well, maybe there's well, it goes back to the learning thing. I know I could be part of a system where I know all its problems. That could be also true, It doesn't have to be your conclusion. You could also, I hate to break that, I hope you're sitting down. You could be wrong, I know this is your podcast, but let me break the news. You may not be right on this one.
But I'm not wrong that Democrats have been in charge effectively for the last 20 years. I'm not wrong about that. I'm not wrong about the fact that people feel there's chaos in the big cities, that they don't feel the Democrats stand up for law and order, that defund the police was a mistake for Democrats. That's part of why Donald Trump got elected.
Joanna, let me just say this. One is, I was never for defund the police. I wasn't mayor then. I wouldn't be for it. I've spoken out against it. Second is, you have my record as 8 years, the good and the bad and the ugly as mayor on education. I know what the results were. Third, I know, having negotiated for President Obama and Arnie Duncan in the first budget, the race to the top, which educational those standards continue to improve. So your criticism, I love you already, not exactly accurate. Number two, wait a second. You get to ask, I get to finish.
Okay.
Number two, I have been part of this as being authentic and honest. I have said the Democrats' own responsibility for keeping schools closed way too long, and the data has proven children in quote-unquote blue states have done worse on reading and math than red states, and everybody's looking at their shoes. So, and I've had the honesty to say, we got to own that and be in front of that. So your characterization of either Democrats and or me, no disrespect, I appreciate the outfit of the red, white, and blue and the stars on this great holiday, not accurate. And I will say, part of life, which I think is true for you, true for me, you'll learn from mistakes. But I've never changed from making sure that educational had access, kids had, and families had access to healthcare, and they were able to save for their retirement. That has been core to what I've done and core to what I think the party done. And Democrats, under both the two presidents I worked with, my tenure as mayor, have actually made education more accessible and have seen the standards raised and then the resources to help people get to it.
All right, let me ask you another question. We had Governor Newsom on the show 2 weeks ago, and he was talking about, obviously, the pressure of having the National Guard come into a very small area in LA and the signalling that sent from Donald Trump. He was very calm. He said he wanted to talk to people on both sides consistently, which he's been doing on his own podcast. And I was surprised by the thousands of comments we got from people watching the podcast saying this is what Democratic leadership looks like. Here's someone who's calm, he's a leader, he's been a governor, he should stand. What do you think of Governor Newsom?
Well, we're friends, so I'm not light about picking his friends.
Would he be a good president?
Look, for whoever we nominate, meaning whether it's myself or others, I'm going to support him. I think he has the right values. I think he has proven over time his tenure as both a mayor, a lieutenant governor, and governor to take on some tough issues. California is not only a big state, I think it's fourth largest economy in the world. So he has clearly background. And I think I get back to this. So let me say this. We're all going to fail. I said for host of podcasts, everybody else fails. The question is,
it's not a great. I just want to say it's not a great slogan for you. Everybody fails. Everybody fails. Please don't use that as your slogan.
Podcast people never fail. Those on the other side. And so I'm going to say this as both a student of history, having had the privilege to serve two presidents in the West Wing. We're all going to fail.
Just don't use that as your slogan, Rahm.
Let me just try to finish. I apologize. Let me just try to finish. The question is, do you have the judgment and character to learn from that failure and apply it to the next challenge? I saw that up close. I've seen it with myself. And I go back to that anecdote from history of the Bay of Pigs versus the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I think every person that is thinking about this that you would have on the Democratic side, they would tell you where they have failed, and they will tell you what they learned. You have to have the character and the judgment. It gets back to where we started on Donald Trump, to ask the questions that press your staff, that allow you, because it's a fog down the road, and you have to see how that road turns, and you have to have the character and the experience and the people to kind of navigate with that floodlight into that fog. And have I made mistakes? Plenty of them. I'm getting reminded, but if you have 3 kids like I do, I have plenty of them.
But Rahm, the great thing about anybody running for president now is it's very clear following President Trump that no one expects a perfect person anymore. Used to be that they did, right? And somebody had flaws, they didn't want them. Now nobody's expecting that. We actually have a convicted felon in the White House. So the bar is quite low, actually, on that one. I guess I've got two final questions for you.
Though, Joanna, one thing. If that's the case, we're all graded on a curve and I'll do fine.
Okay, well, then that's that. You should put that in your stump speech.
Yeah, we're all graded on a curve.
If you were a betting man, what would you say happens in Iran now?
Here's one. Iran. This is, they're going to respond. My gut tells me, based on history, they ended the Iran-Iraq war, and they called it drinking poison from the chalice. In the early days of Iraq war by George Bush, 43, they sent a 10-point program. Had Bush accepted that history would be different, he did. He was arrogant. Cheney was arrogant. All of them were arrogant. And history would be different. So when their backs are against the wall, historically, they've taken survival and made a choice. we have one of the things, having grown up apart, my dad was in the middle, from Israel. Their pride has been severely damaged. Nobody, not just Persian or Middle Eastern, that likes that. And so there will be a strife. I believe it will not get to the worst, but I think that there's going to be a combination between patterns of the past and anger, resentment, embarrassment, and shame that they think they have to correct. And there's a fusion of those two and I don't know the question is, they're going to take something. How do we react to it thoughtfully? And there's an act 2 that has yet to play, and we're in a 4-act play, and we just made a move on scene 1 of act 1, and we're about to go into scene 2 of act 2.
And then final question, you have 2 very successful brothers, Rahm Emanuel, who obviously is a Hollywood legend and something of an oligarch now, I believe, is fair. I think that AOC and Bernie Sanders would have something to say about Ari. And you have a brother,
Well, you should see what I say. He always had the upper bond.
Well, I'm very interested to know what you say about him.
Why do I have to wait for Bernie and AOC? You should have seen we shared a room our entire life. I have my own views of what those are, and I bet you they're far more severe than AOC's and Bernie's.
All right, well, I'm very curious to know then. What do you think? And then I want to know what your mother put in the breakfast cereal.
All right, I'm going to call you on this. Now I'm serious. Why is it my mother? How do you know it's both my parents?
Well, it could be your dad. Totally could be your dad.
I did. You're not the first to. I take being a father seriously. One of the great things I had is a role model who I think is really superior, my father. No child is not raised by their parents, not a parent. And my mother did a superb job. My father passed away 5 years ago. We're on the shadows of Father's Day. My mother did a lot with the 3 boys. As I used to say, you love Ezekiel more than you love me. She said, no, I hate you all equally.
That's a fantastic line I'm going to use with my kids.
But my father taught me everything about how to be a father, how to be a husband, how to be a citizen, as did my mother. And I am who I am because of both of them, not one of them.
Fair, totally fair. I should have asked about both parents.
I want to call you out because, everybody talks about equity at home, but if we only ask about the mother, we kind of let all of us off the table.
I guess I was doing it because I was A, inbuilt prejudice, but B, the time and the fact he was a doctor made me think that he would be out early in the morning. But totally fair point.
No, but look, so I'm going to write a piece for the Post one day. Because people ask about my brothers and me, and then, 8 lessons, or whatever the number is, that I swore that I would never do as a parent, that I'm repeating everything my parents had done. And I'll tell you one other thing that my mother did. So since you asked, that I think was fundamentally important to 2 things she did. One, we never had a rectangle table at the kitchen table. It was circle. Nobody would be head of the table. Everybody had a responsibility to speak up, be heard, etc. Mom and Dad were not the head of the table. Yes, we were the head of the family, but not head of the family discussion. Second, when you walked into our house, you didn't walk in the front door. You walked down the side door into the kitchen, right into the kitchen, which is where the family was. But about 4 feet in was the refrigerator, side of the refrigerator. And my mother put up our report cards. And until the next report card. And whoever walked in the house, family, friend.
Brutal.
Yeah, well, trust me, it's brutal if Ezekiel's your brother because he got straight A's. And let me just break the news to you. That was not my role model. Okay. And everybody saw. So if you got a D, or which I didn't get, but if you got below an A, very slow. The third thing she did.
Did you do that with your kids?
We did we did a similar thing, not like that, but a similar thing on Shabbat, Sabbath dinner. Whoever did the best that week on a math test or whatever, a history or a play or whatever it was, On Sabbath dinner, Shabbat, they got the star plate, and they were allowed to invite or encourage a friend and the friend's family to our family Sabbath dinner. And that was the honor you earned by doing something exceptional. The third thing my mother did that I think was important for the three boys and was in the family room. There was my grandmother's their purse that had Grandma Sophie, Auntie Ida, and Gertrude, their passports that brought them to America at the turn of the century. Mm-hmm. And on either side were the black and white photos of our family, my mother's side and my dad's side, relatives who never made it to America. And it was nothing subtle in a Jewish home, but it was my parents very clear to the three boys, this is an honor, this is a gift, and you're not allowed to screw it up. If you do, you'll get the backside of our hand. And it was those three things, the table, the report card, and the family room wall photos, because those eyes stared at you. They stared into you. The responsibility and the gift of being an American.
There's been a rise in anti-Semitism in America. Is America ready for a Jewish president?
Well, first of all, I have again, I know you find it shocking, a slight twist. I don't think there's been a rise, but it's been because there's always anti-Semitism. There has been a greater exposure that people have a permission slip to say what they used to say privately, say it publicly. So I believe anti-Semitism always exists. It's now more public than it's been in the past, where it was taboo. The taboo's been lifted. And people now, not only taboo lifted, are acting on it. Though also, as Rahm Emanuel got elected to a congressional district that Dan Rostenkowski, Roman Kuczynski, Frank Annunzio got elected to, Blagojevich got elected to. I didn't fit that profile. And with 3% of the district was Jewish. They elected me because I thought they judged me, and they did that as mayor where it's 3%. So I've seen the best of people look past gender or ethnicity into somebody's character and their ideas, their energy, etc. When we were in Tokyo, Amy and I,
as ambassador,
somebody spray painted on our fence some ugly Nazi words, etc. And a neighbor, unbeknownst to me, still hasn't come forward, cleaned it up for us within 24 hours. So I have seen the best I've seen the worst. I've grown up with it, and not only when I was a child, but I've grown up with it. And then I'll close on this one comment. I grew up with it. My first independent political act was when the neo-Nazis couldn't get a permit to not march in Skokie. I went to where they were going to go to Marquette Park. And my father said no, and I said, Dad, just because they're not next door doesn't mean they can't be heard. And he got angry at me. He says I'm a schmuck. And he got in the car with me, and we drove down to Marquette Park together. And that was my first political act, not directed by my parents. And my father goes back to this, called me a schmuck, said no, fought me, got in the side of the car, and drove down to Marquette Park with me. Because those SOBs, they weren't next door, but I was never going to let them have the last word.
So what did you do when you got there?
Well, we almost got the crap knocked out of us, and our life was threatened because of a lot of other things that is much longer. So I have to run. I love you. I think this is a great podcast. And we've learned that the podcast host is never wrong.
No, we've not learned that. That's not what I said at all. I've made many, many errors, but I'm not running for president, so there's slightly less on it. And we get voted on every day. We get voted on every day. People either watch or they don't watch.
I'm gonna make a mistake. That's not a
I just don't want you to run on that, Rahm. That can't be your slogan. Everybody fails.
But I am going to be truthful, which is about life. The question is, can you learn from it? And I have learned from my own to this point, and I continue to hope that I continue to learn and never stop.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, and I look forward to talking to you again. So, what I want to know is, do you think he is a plausible candidate for Democratic leadership? We had Governor Newsom on the show 2 weeks ago. Now we've had Rahm Emanuel. He's clearly eyeing up a run. Go to the comments on YouTube and let us know what you think. And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and please share it with your friends. We love having more people watch us and more people comment, and I love the individual conversations. The threads of conversations are really fascinating. And for up-to-the-minute coverage on everything that's going on, and there is a lot of it, remember Elon Musk, remember the National Guard, remember tariffs. Of course you don't, because of what's just happened over the weekend. Don't forget to subscribe to the Daily Beast. It couldn't be more simple. Just go dailybeast.com and subscribe. And don't forget, whatever you are doing this week, be beast. This podcast was produced by Devon Rogerino, Anna Von Ursen, and it was edited by Jesse Millward.